Wel zurufen zu der Bühne, die alle Menschen, was wollen sich beteiligen in dem Panel. I'd like to call all the panelists forward. And as they're coming up, just to say a few words, ich habe sich nicht vorgestellt. Ich heiße Sheva Zucker und ich bin der Sekretär von der Yiddish Liga. I'm the director of the League for Yiddish. In addition to making these films about Yiddish writers, of which this is the third, we also publish this magazine. Oi, Catherine, are you okay? Okay. Wir geben euch aus dem Journal, was heißt Affenschwell. It is an all-Yiddish magazine. Es seien da etliche Exemplare, was ihr könnt nehmen via Matone. Versteht sich, wir hoffen, dass ihr wird euch abonnieren. Okay. So, please come up, Goldie. Okay, wie du willst. Anna? Are you okay? Okay, so ich will reden da, wir wollen reden a bisschen gemixt. There are people here I know. I've invited some who don't speak Yiddish. So we'll do whatever kind of comes to us. Lass mir vorstellen die Menschen auf dem Panel. Das ist Goldie Morgenthaler. This is Chava Rosenfarb's daughter, also her main translator. Goldie is a professor of English literature at the University of Alberta in Lethbridge, Alberta. Chana Fishman-Gonscher, sie ist die, wenn man's Call, ihr hat gehört. Auf dem Film, sie hat durchgeführt im Interview. Sie ist jahrelang gewesen Lektorin in Yiddish und der jiddischer Literatur in McGill und sie ist ein Teil von unserer Fakultät da in YIVO. She's on the faculty of the Weinreich summer program at YIVO, which by the way is one of the sponsors of this event. Und Josh Waletsky, ist der Regisseur von dem Film. Ihr kennt ihn öfter. Yeah. Von anderen seine Filmen, Image Before My Eyes, Partisans of Vilna, In the Fiddler's House, to name just a few, and Catherine Hellerstein. Sie ist gewesen die Übersetzerin. She was the translator of the poems in the film, and she is a professor of Yiddish literature at Penn. So, ich will fragen jeden einem eine Frage. Danach, ob wir haben Zeit, if time permits, we'll open it up to the audience. Can you all hear? Yes. Yes. Okay. Lass mal anheben mit dem Regisseur, mit Josh. Für was soll man machen einen Film? Wegen Chava Rosenfarben oder wegen wem es soll nicht sein? Was kriegt man heraus von dem, was man hat nicht von Stamm Lehnen, dem Schreibers Biografie oder von Lehnen von ihrer oder seinem Werk? You've now done 4 of these films for the League for Yiddish. The 4th is forthcoming. Do you think that your ideas about why to make these films have changed over the course of your work, and also your sense of what you would want them to convey?
Reden auf Englisch, auf Yiddish. English, good. Ich meine, als die Sibbe für was zu machen, ein Film wegen einem Schreiber, beißt sich schon nicht mit der Zeit, nur mit dem Schreiber. I think the reason for making a film about a writer whose writings we have changes maybe more with the writer, from writer to writer, than through the years. And I think with Chava, we get a sense more by watching her as she gives her answers, how she feels about what she's saying, which we might get from reading what she's written, but because she's speaking as herself, about herself. You can say the same the same thing and say, with your face, you make the commentary. So that's, I think, a kurzer Rente.
Okay. Hanne, ich gedenk, wenn wir sind gesessen in unser Büro, wir sind jahrelang Kollegen, we've been colleagues for years, in NYU, wenn die Sommerprogramm ist gewesen in NYU, und ich habe gesagt, ich suche Emerson, was soll interviewieren Chava Rosenfarb. Any ideas? Who can do this? Weil der Mensch darf kennen gut Yiddish. Hast du sich bald zugehabt zu dem und gesagt, ich kann. Und es ist gewesen sehr klar, als du hast eine starke Verbindung mit Chava's Schreiben. Did you feel this strong connection just to her work or also to her as a person? And could you talk about how you came to know Chava Rosenfarb and her work and what it has meant for you?
All right, so that was pure chutzpah on my part, I have to tell you.
You convinced me.
I grew up knowing Chava. Chava, I grew up in a Buddhist home. Chava was my hero from a very early age on. I heard about her, I knew her story, I knew her personally, I heard her poetry. To me, she was majestic in stature physically and majestic in her creativity. And there was something superhero-like about her. And I felt a very, very strong connection. And somehow I just, when we spoke about it, I said to myself, this is an opportunity to just bring her to a wider audience through my eyes. I mean, I think that you got a sense that the questions were really posed in order to show her really the way I wanted her seen. I think one gets that. I wasn't very objective, and I asked questions that. Why are you laughing? I asked questions to which I knew most of the answers. I think Josh and I talked about going into this film. We were a little bit concerned about how responsive Chava could be, and I just felt that I had to just make her as strong and as important as she deserves to be.
Okay, for Goldie. Wie hast du angeheben übersetzen der Mames Werk? Ist es gewesen zufällig oder hat sie gehabt etwas einen weitgereichten Plan, als du sollst werden ihr Übersetzer? Hat sie gelernt, als was du hast übersetzt von ihrem Werk? How did you start translating your mother's work? You mentioned that we argued. Do you care, and we saw that in the film, do you care to share one of those arguments, and how did they get resolved? Are you still translating her? And how has that process changed now that you don't have her to use as a dictionary, which all of us who translate Yiddish know that it's hard to find certain words, no matter how many dictionaries you have. And also, now that you don't have her to consult with and to really know that you're getting it. And did she read everything that you translated of hers?
Okay, ich will entfernen auf Englisch.
Okay,
it was no accident that I began to translate my mother. She, contrary to what she says in the film, she wanted to be translated from the day one. When I was 13 and I was sick, I had an operation on my back, so I couldn't get out of bed. She brought me her play, Der Vogel vom Ghetto, and she asked me to help her translate it. As I say, I was 13, and my English was okay, but it was not great, and that was really how we began. And from that time on, I've never really stopped translating her. And I'm working now on a translation of Brief zu Abraschen, Letters to Abrasha. So, and also a volume of her essays. So I'm still, it's my way of remaining in contact with her, even though she's gone. It's become something I do really. I didn't like doing it very much when she was alive, and now I am sorry that she's not here to help me, not just with words, but just morally. Translation goes a little bit beyond just, I'm sure a lot of people here have been translators, and there's more to it than just putting words from one language into another language. And I wish she were around to help me get the actual meaning of some of the things that she wrote. As to whether she was involved with the translations, completely, and we argued seriously, and to the extent of the doors were banged and I stomped out of the room a number of times. Sometimes she was right. Her English was a learned English. She learned it in the ghetto, as she says, but she translated a lot of her own material as well. And so when she thought that it should be a certain way in English, she was determined to have it that way. And when I said it doesn't sound like English, she wouldn't listen to me, and we'd have very major arguments. Sometimes she would use words that I had never heard of, and I'd say, "You can't say that," and she'd say, "Yes, I can," and she'd show me the dictionary, and sometimes she was right. So we were even on that score. But in terms of translation, I just want to put in a plug. She's actually, I am so sorry that she's gone. Her book of short stories is coming out in Spanish in Spain, and The Tree of Life is coming out in Polish in Lodz. So.
Wow, okay. Catherine, kannst du ein bisschen reden wegen die verschiedenen Inyonim, Problemen, auf welche du hast dich angetroffen beim Übersetzen Chava's work? Can you talk about the different challenges that you encountered translating?
I'll try. Hopefully I won't run out of the room in a coughing fit again. Forgive me if I do. First of all, translation is like childbirth. It's very painful, but the minute it's over, you forget about the pain and you want to start it all over again. So I had to go back to my drafts with comments from all of you in one way or another to remember some of the pain of the translation. But it was, first of all, an incredible privilege to be asked to be part of this project, because usually when I translate for the page and the individual reader. And here I was translating poetry with all the problems of translating poetry for the screen, and the lines of English had the privilege of flowing beneath Chava's incredible recitation of her poems in Yiddish. And so any faults in the translations got sort of obliterated by the power of the Yiddish. One of the issues with her poetry, with much Yiddish poetry, but especially with Chava's poetry, was that, as she said, she felt fenced in by the forms, the rhyme and the stanza and the meter of poetry. And when she blossomed into prose later on, she really found her major voice. Not the closed form of the poems in Yiddish is absolutely gorgeous. And almost flawless, of course, that makes it all the harder to render in English. So what I did, looking over my translations again this afternoon, I saw that in a couple of these 4-line, alternate line rhymed poems, I was able to get the sort of perfect form in a few stanzas, and then in the other stanzas I had to find a way formally in English to approximate the Yiddish forms. So I used off-rhymes and half-rhymes and assonance or consonants instead of full-fledged end rhymes. I think that on the screen, looking at it just now, I felt that somehow the English worked because the powerful music of the Yiddish provided more music in the translation.
Good. I just will mention that if you get the DVD, there is a bonus of about 35 minutes of Chava reading from her poetry with Catherine's translations. So that's something that we didn't show, but it's there for you. Good. I'd like to open it up to the audience if anybody has anything. Okay, maybe come up and use the... Jennifer, is Jennifer here? There was supposed to be a mic in the house, but I guess there's not. So just if you would come up and... Oh, there's mics on both. Oh, perfect. Okay, there's one over there. And where's the one on this side?
Both sides.
Ah, okay, I don't see it. Okay, I see it now. Good.
A couple of just working. Maybe just some factual questions, and then I have.
Push the button. I don't know anything about it, but you're welcome to use this rather than here. Now it's on. It's on.
Now it's on?
Yeah.
Okay, I just was curious about how old was she when this film was made, and how much after that did she die? But my main question is, since she considered prose her main venue, why did you only concentrate on poetry? Why didn't you have her read any of her prose?
There was a section from Letters to a Brusha.
There is on the Chana. Do you want to answer?
Well, there is a little bit of prose from Letters to a Brasha, but I think for artistic purposes, the poetry lends itself much better to this kinds of presentation, and then of course with the musical background it becomes something different, and just reading prose doesn't have the same kind of effect. Read her in prose.
I have, and I'm worried that when people see this, they won't know about her prose, which is so much.
Well,
Well,
I
she
think we talked about it quite a bit in the film.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions, Chaim? Yeah.
Is this one working? Yes. Hi. Loud. So this is a question for Goldie and for Josh and everybody. But so I wanted to know, we saw this great picture, and congratulations, I really enjoyed the film. If you were to show me the side that I'd like to know, other than the side there, an inner side of her and the private side, if you could just give me just one little bit of the one that is not revealed there, that you could, the romance, the passion, the painful side, if you could give me just a little bit that you could reveal but that's not there, what would you say in a few words on each of them? That you saw, Josh, when you were, when the camera was off, Goldie, that you know, and Chana, of course, that you know as well. And so if you could, just the inner side.
Goldie?
Oh, a little bit of private.
I'm not too sure what you're asking, but I have a feeling I shouldn't answer the question.
Es ist ein bisschen ein Mischigas. Ich wollte gewollt fragen, was ist der innerwenigste Seite von ihr? Etwas, was man sieht.
Wenn man leint, was hat geschrieben,
Ich hab geleint.
weiß man die innerwenigste Seite, dachte ich mir. as you want me to tell you her biography?
Oh, not the biography. Just the sides that we didn't see, like, during the filming.
You know, I think what I like about this film is that, in fact, you see her as she is. And I get a sense, her warm-heartedness, I think, comes through very, very beautifully. And also she's not, when she's asked the question about being in Montreal, and being a Yiddish writer in Montreal, the expected answer would be, oh, Yiddish is a great language, and Yiddish literature, and I felt fine. That's not what she says. What she says is what she actually felt. That she felt that it was kleinstädteldick, that she was begrenzt, and she very much, that's why I said about translation, she wanted to reach out to the wider world, and she really wanted to be understood, to find receptive ears among non-Jews as well as Jews. And she felt frustrated that that didn't happen. So when she answers that, that's her. I mean, I don't think there wasn't. I don't think there was another side that she was hiding.
Goldie, we didn't answer the previous woman's question about how old she was when the film was made and how much longer.
I don't remember, when was the film made?
07 or 09, Hannah? When did we film her? Gedenkst? I think it was 2009.
I think so too.
Yeah.
So it's 2 years before she died. She's 85 in the film.
And she lived another 2 years. Okay, another question? Yes? Okay, these two, I think, and that'll be it from the audience.
My question is for Goldie. Do you remember any specific examples of issues? What were the disagreements in the translations? Do you remember maybe one or two of those?
I remember one having to do with the word lazarette, which I had never heard before, and I told her you can't use that. And she showed me in the English dictionary that there is such a word, and she insisted on using it. And I basically realized that it was my ignorance that happened a number of times. That words that I had not heard of, and she found them in the dictionary. And much, you know, as I said, sometimes it was a word that she was simply. It wasn't a word that was used a lot, and I said, you can't use it. It's not the right word. But sometimes it was.
And Catherine, did you have a chance to have any response on your translations?
Unfortunately, no. If I'd started earlier, I knew Chava, and I know Goldie through Chava, right? Or Chava through Goldie, I don't remember. But anyways, I think she would have been happy to, tell me where I was making mistakes too. But she was so generous and lovely, but I just didn't get to her until afterwards.
Oh, and what does lazarette mean?
Lazarette, it's a kind of hospital. It's a kind of, it's from the word Lazarus.
I was thinking.
Yeah, and she, yeah. It's where she was, where one of her heroines, it's based on her own story, was sent. In Bergen-Belsen, she had typhoid. They sent them to a lazarette, and I thought it should be hospital, right, or hospice. And my mother insisted on that word, and the word exists. So she's right.
Yeah, yeah. If you read a lot of Holocaust literature, you'll definitely come across that word. It's kind of more maybe a makeshift hospital or something like that. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. This is for Goldie. Can you speak to your mother's
Speak
writing?
into the mic.
Sorry. Can you speak to your mother's writing style, how she organized her ideas and researched or expressed? Did she have a particular time of day that she wrote, or?
She wrote very early in the morning, especially when I was young. My brother was young. I have a younger brother. She would get up around 5 o'clock in the morning and then write until we woke up, and she would take care of us, send us off to school. And then when we were at school, she wrote again. And then when I came home from lunch, she would interrupt and talk to me. And if I said something clever, she would, or she thought it was clever, she would jump up and write it down and come back, and we continued talking. And then when I went back to school, she would write. She wrote all the time.
The cadence of the novels was so well balanced. How did she map out or plan out her strategies for the novel?
I haven't found, I've been going through her papers and I haven't found a plan, but she obviously had a very clear one. And she did do research quite a lot for things that she didn't know. So she was a very organized writer and a very passionate one.
Thank you.
Good. Okay, Bob, did you want to ask?
Yeah, I took a tour of a cemetery some weeks ago, and I was struck by the very interesting biographies of things I learned about all these wonderful Yiddish men who did all this terrific Yiddish writing. This is the first time I'm being exposed to the incredible writing of a Jewish woman in Yiddish, in literature, that I've not been aware of. I've lived my whole life. In fact, I grew up behind the Favre, so I'm rather impressed by the fact that there's half of our population that I had no idea about. So I'm rather curious whether this particular film is a harbinger of any kind of sense that there's a population of creativity and literary genius that exists that we're not aware of, that we should be mining for.
By
Okay.
Catherine Hellerstein's latest book.
Yeah.
And Sheva has been working on women Yiddish writers for many years. So have I. There's a lot out there. There's a lot. There's a beautiful, actually, collection. I want to put in a plug for Exile at Last. This beautiful, slender volume of Chava's poems that Goldie and Chava translated together. That came out a year or 2 years ago.
2013.
Yeah, it was. It's just a beautiful collection. But there's a long tradition of women writers in Yiddish and. Lots of it in English translation.
Terrific.
So,
If I can
have a
just
good time.
add, I think, so I studied Yiddish literature for many years, and in all my years of studying, there was one half of one class ever devoted to a Yiddish writer. Okay, that was back in the day. Yiddish woman writer, which was Dvorah Fogel in Chonish Meruk's class, Oliver Sholem, and he was very proud. He said, "Aber ich habe doch gelernt Dvorah Fogel." Like I taught. We had a class on Dvorah Fogel, but that was half a class in my whole career. Since then, things have really changed. But I think that your perception is one that certainly people could legitimately have maybe until the last 20 years, because not to put you down at all, but like
20 years, what can I
so. But since then, things have really been happening with women. Frida Foreman, who gave a talk for our students here, has put out several anthologies of Yiddish women's prose, and the League for Yiddish actually. One of the other films that we did was on Bela Schechter Gottesman, a woman poet. So it's today there's really a lot that is accessible to people.
Irena Klepfish is in our audience, who was one of
Klepfish.
the pioneers in this area as well,
Yeah.
of making Yiddish women writers known.
Yeah, but there certainly was a time when almost nothing was in translation. Howe Greenberg, who did kind of the canonical collections, had no women in the prose. There were a couple in the poetry. So yeah, things have changed. Right. Okay, I said last, but since it's Shana, okay.
Yeah, in the film, Chava says that she doesn't know anything about these tons of young people who are interested in Yiddish.
What's Simon say?
She would love to know, and I just want to know if she ever had the chance to acquaint herself with that, if she had a chance to meet any of these young people who are so interested in Yiddish and in her.
Goldie, it sounds like
No.
it's for you.
No, I'm sorry to say no. I mean, the film was made in, I think, 2009, and she lived with me in Lethbridge, Alberta, which is where I teach. Lethbridge, Alberta is Judenrein. There are no Jews there. So she was not in a community where she might have met people like that. So sadly, my answer is no.
But Goldie, wait, you were, you know, we were all once younger light, right?
No,
and she knew that there were at least people of our generation that were interested, or
We weren't young. We're
well,
not young.
once we to her
We were.
we're not. I said we were.
I think, in all honesty, I think given where Chava stayed at the time, there were things that she clearly did not remember. I mean, when she visited Australia, she certainly was exposed to young people in Australia doing it. But I think there were things that she had encountered but were no longer part of her
But you know something?
active memory.
I don't think that was a question of her active memory. I think she, from her experience, she did not know young people who spoke Yiddish, and if she knew them, she would have said, it's not a big deal. And that's in fact what she said.
Right. She knew young people who spoke Yiddish. That wasn't the issue. That wasn't the point that I raised. And that's not the point that this young woman is raising. The point is that the interest of the newer generation in Yiddish and their activities and now this launching of this wonderful new online journal in Giveb, that I think was not part of her world. But certainly young people speaking Yiddish, yeah, for her that was no big deal. I mean, we all spoke Yiddish, I think. But she had encountered at certain, later in her life, she had encountered young people doing stuff in Yiddish, particularly in Australia. I just really believe it wasn't part of her consciousness.
But she hadn't been in Australia for a very long time.
It wasn't part of her
But the question was
anymore.
afterwards, and the answer is no.
Also, hunderter, you know, I think the scale, I'm not sure there's
Around the
hunderter
world.
either, but
If you take it around the world, it is. I mean, you know.
Okay, Josh.
That's true. I just want to jump back to the months preceding the filming, and I remember quite vividly that there was great questions about whether the filming would actually be able to go forward or not, because Chava's recall and her ability to have a sustained conversation were in question at the in the well, I remember correspondence going back and forth where there was actually the question raised.
You called it off once, and then you wrote back and said, "Let's go ahead." You were worried.
So only to say that, and I've now filmed many interviews with people who are elderly or aging and are being asked about looking back over their entire lives, and maybe just to repeat something which Chana said before, I think Chana deserves great praise for having created a very supportive atmosphere in the interview, and you can see Chava kind of locking in to the moment that she's being asked about, and I believe that this is maybe the fuller answer to the question you first asked me, which is why bother filming someone if we have their work? Because when an interview is conducted well, people can lock back into what is the most significant moments of their life, and they may very well not be so aware of things which they haven't, as she put it, taken into their inner experience, and that doesn't become the richtige Überlebung, is noch dem, was man nimmt es herein in sich und man vereignet, and a person of her age may not have assimilated some of the conversations with Yiddish-speaking young people that didn't have the impact. Anyway, I just wanted to.
One last question, and then we'll adjourn and have something to eat. Ob es da een Sach? Oh, what? Two sittings.
The interview was actually one day of filming, and then the next day we did readings.
No, I think we continued to talk.
No,
Well,
there was some talking.
There
and
were
then
some
the reading, yeah.
questions on the occasion of the readings, but basically, I know from the camera rolls.
We considered ourselves very lucky to have gotten what we did at the time.
Okay. Okay. I'm too lenient.
There is interest in her work, and there's actually somebody doing work on Montreal Yiddish writers altogether. But as far as I know, only one half of one of her stories has been translated into French. But there is a Jewish-French composer whose name is Henri Oppenheim, who has put to music many of her poems and the poems of other Yiddish writers of Montreal.
And it's fabulous.
Yeah.
Really spectacular.
Yes, The Tree of Life was translated into Hebrew as Etz HaChaim. That's about it. That's all.
Okay, so just one last question. If there's one thing that you would like people to take from this film and never forget, what would it be, if anybody? I know what it is for me, but I'd like to hear from others. Catherine? Some line or
does
something.
it have to only be one thing?
Oh, no. Sorry.
Well, actually, I think, oh gosh, what I take, one of the many things I take from it is the amazing image of the paintings she did, especially the painting of the lovers, whom she was so discreet about not identifying, which was just perfect, and the poetry of the visual image, the poetry of her face as a baby or a toddler in her father's arms, of her herself as a young woman post-war, and coming out of the DP camps, and then her beautiful presence, physical presence, and her beautiful voice as a very old woman. I mean, I just think that that range of visual imagery is extraordinary.
Anybody else want to answer?
Maybe the thing which stays with me the most deeply is the way she negotiated her remembering her father. And I think for me the one line that remains every time I see the film is "De beiße ein mit Hunger in mein Freud." You bite hungrily into my joy. There's something extremely moving to me about the way she embraces the pain and and also the nourishment that she got from her father.
Okay. Anybody else? Muss nicht einfach nur gewählt. Hanne?
I think the film succeeds in presenting a very powerful image of a person who knows her mind and had this incredible gift of expressing it in the most exquisite use of language. And I think that, to me, that's what it's about.
Goldie?
I guess what I would like people to take away from the film is that my mother was a great writer, and I think she deserves to be better known. And if the film does anything towards that, I'll be very grateful. She was also a wonderful woman, very warm-hearted, and the film captures that. She also had a sense of humor, as you may have noticed. Really, for me, it's a very emotional experience to see this film because it brings her back as I remember her, actually, a lot with a smile, a wonderful smile, and her sense of humor, her sense of, and she speaks from the heart, I think, for most of it. That her memory's a little off here and there, it's true, but doesn't matter.
I guess for me, it's a few things. Wenn sie hat gesagt, der jiddische Schreiber ist keinmal nicht befriedigt, that a Yiddish writer is never satisfied. I mean, she was so sharp, so right on. And how she described when her poems were wrested from her in Auschwitz, and sie hat gesagt, ich habe gewusst, ich will weiter schreiben. Just this knowledge that this was temporary, that she would write again. You know, where does a person get this strength? So with that, we will conclude. If I can just say, ihr könnt das kaufen. You're welcome to buy this. Heint a wilde Metzia. Sie gewöhnlich $35, aber heint 25. It's normally $35 plus postage, but you can get it here for $25. And also, please, don't just think of this as something for your Yiddish-speaking friends, if you have such, okay? I think that Chava would have very much wanted to, as you saw, get out of that narrow Yiddish circle. I think that this is a film that anybody who's interested in writing, in literature, in the Holocaust, in women's writing in particular, could definitely appreciate. So if you have a reading group or a book group or whatever it may be, some kind of a cultural group, please think about showing this to them. So, a schönen Dank für kommen.